So welcome back. In this video we're going to start looking at Stacks 3 from Yourhead software. Now, as I mentioned previously, Stacks adds a freeform layout to RapidWeaver that will allow us to build up a more custom designed page or site inside of RapidWeaver. So to get Stacks you'll need to go to yourhead.com and then click on the Stacks link in the menu and download the free trial. Now, one thing to note is that Stacks is a paid-for plugin for RapidWeaver, so if you want to use the full version you will need to purchase a copy. However, to get started we can use the free trial, so click the free download button. That will download the plugin to your desktop or your downloads folder. Just double click that and RapidWeaver will install it for you. I've already got Stacks installed, so I'm going to go ahead and open my site project here. And the first thing we're going to do is now add a new page, go to all plugins and select the Stacks plugin type here. That will add a Stacks page to our page list on the left hand side. Before we get started with adding any stacks to our page or adding any content to our page, I'm going to rename this one as work, and then I'm going to drag it to the bottom of our page list. Then what I'm going to do to give us a little bit more room whilst we're editing in Stacks is I'm going to hide the source list or the left hand sidebar here. To do that you can go to the view menu and choose hide source list or press Command Alt L. Okay, so the first thing to note is that Stacks does not have a standard editing area like the Markdown or the styled text page does. What you need to do is add stacks into this area. Now, it's a little bit confusing because the components that you use inside of Stacks are called stacks. So you'll see here a list of stacks in the library are available to add to this Stacks page. So what we're going to do is drag in some of these elements or these stacks onto the page, and that will allow us to add different types of content and layout to our page. So rather than talking any more about this, let's start adding some stacks and see how it works. So the first one we're going to do is add a text stack. So click and drag that onto the page and you'll see you get a paragraph of text on your page. You can double click and edit this in the same way you would any other styled text area. So we can make this text bold like so, underlined, and you can add links and so on. Okay. Next, let's add a header. So we'll scroll down to the content area and we'll drag and drop in the header. And again, we can double click and call this something else, like so. Okay, the next thing to note is that we can drag and drop to reorder these stacks. So at any time we can move them up or down the page or above or below other content on the page. So you're not stuck with where you've dragged it into the page, you can reorder these at any time. Okay, the next basic thing of stacks to note is that we can edit each one of these stacks by opening the page inspector. So we can either click on the page inspector button here, or we can click on the eye on each individual stack. That will open up the page inspector to the page specific tab here. Then when we scroll down, you'll see that you have options for each one of these stacks. So for example here for the header, we can change which type of header this is. By default it becomes an H3, but we could make this the page title, and that will set it to an H1 tag. Now each stack will have its own individual settings, but there are some settings that are global or applied to every single stack, and those are things like the background, border and layout. There's also a responsive option here where you can hide this stack on mobile, tablet or desktop. We're not going to go into too much detail in this video about all of these settings. I just want to make sure that you're aware that these are available. Okay, so before we go and add any more content or we do anything else on our page, let's open up RapidWeaver's live external preview by pressing Command P on the keyboard just to see how this page works. And you can see here it works in exactly the same way as all of our other pages. We have our theme applied, so we've got our standard header and slogan, and our menu is still here. Our stacks page has been added to the menu as normal, and you can see we have our main content area here, and this is where we added our stacks onto our stacks page. So this works in the same way as any other page where you add content into the editing area in RapidWeaver, and that gets applied to the main content area of your page. So that's the basics of how you add stacks to your page. What we're now going to do is have a look at how we could use some different layout types to create a more unique page on our site. So I'm going to close the page inspector for just a minute, and what we're going to do now is add some of these layout stacks. So the first one we're going to do is add a 3-column layout below this text, and that you will see we get a 3-column drop area, or we get 3 drop areas for these columns, and we can drag and drop in any of the stacks inside each one of these columns. So for example, if we just drag in some text into each stack, and then we can copy this text actually if you hold down the Alt key and then drag and drop that into each column. If we go to Safari and preview this, you'll see that we have a 3-column layout. Now we need to add some margin and padding to these stacks areas, but you can see here we have 1 column, 2 columns, 3 columns. So it's as simple as that to add a column layout to your page. What we might want to do here is add a margin to the bottom of this text, so we can click the I button, and on the layout here we can click the plus button, and then you can add detailed margin. So we might want 40 pixels of margin on the bottom, and you'll see that instantly gets applied. If we go back and preview, you'll see we now have that space below. Now you might have noticed that we still have the sidebar applied here, and we can add sidebar content as before by typing in some text, and that will get applied as normal into the sidebar area. But because we're using stacks, what I often do is hide the sidebar for the theme, because essentially we can recreate the sidebar inside of stacks by using these column layouts. So what I'm going to do is remove that text from the sidebar, go to the theme customization settings, uncheck the use master style, because we're going to override those styles specifically for this page, and what we're going to do is hide the sidebar. So rather than having a right hand sidebar, we're going to set that to hidden. Now when we go back to the preview, you'll see that the sidebar disappears and the stacks area takes up the full width of the content area. So this gives us some flexibility, as I say, because we could, if we wanted to, recreate a sidebar by using the stacks layout stacks. So with that being said, let's actually look at how we could create something a little bit more useful. So what I want to do is have 2 rows of 3 columns with examples of the work I've done or the projects that I've worked on. So I'm going to have some images, headers and text, and have them separated into 3 columns like we have here. So to do that, I'm going to close out the page inspector, and I'm actually going to remove these text stacks that we added before. Now inside of each one of these 3 columns, I'm going to add a 1-column wrapper stack. Now you'll see why we're doing this in just a second, but essentially this 1-column stack is going to act as a wrapper so that we could put a border around the content we're going to add. Next, I'm going to add an image stack inside of here, and you'll start to notice that we can add stacks inside of stacks, so they can be nested, and it can get quite complex. And this is one of the benefits of using stacks, because we can lay out our content in any way that we want here. Okay, next inside of the 1-column stack I want a header, so I'm going to drag and drop in the header stack, and then below there I want some text, so we just drag and drop in the text stack. Now when you want to add an image here, all you need to do is drag it in, and I've got some example project images in my assets folder here. So I'm going to drag in the first one, and you'll see that that gets applied. So before we do the other projects, let's go back to Safari and preview that. And there we can see we have our image, the header and the text below there. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is actually style this first column before we duplicate it for the remaining columns. So I'm going to essentially ensure that the styling for this column is correct before we copy that over. So as I said, what I wanted to do was use the 1-column stack to create a border around this content. So I'm going to open up the page inspector. I'm going to close the stacks library so we've got a little bit more space. And what I'm going to do is set a border. So for this 1-column stack, we're saying we want the border width to be 1 pixel all the way around. And we're going to set the color. We can have it as a light grey. Next, I want to add some padding or margin to the bottom of this image. So we go to the layout settings, we add some detailed margin, and we say 20 pixels on the bottom. Next, what I want to do is pad in the header and the text from the left and right hand sides. So we'll select the header stack, we'll go to the detailed padding by pressing the plus button here, and I'm going to say padding left of 20 and padding right 20. Then I'm going to do the same for the text stack. So again, 20 on the left and 20 on the right. So it's a little bit tricky to see in the stacks edit mode, so let's switch over to Safari and see how that looks. And there you can see we've now got a border around this column here, and we've got a little bit of padding on the left and right. The final thing I want to do is add some padding on the bottom and add some rounded corners. So let's go back to RapidWeaver, and what I'm going to do is select the text stack, and we can add 20 pixels of padding to the bottom. Then I wanted those rounded corners, so I select the one column wrapper stack, and here you can see we can have rounded corners, and I'm going to set that to 3 pixels. So we go back to Safari and preview that, and you can see the corners are now rounded, and we've got a nice bit of padding on the bottom of the text here. And finally, before we duplicate this column into the other two columns, what I'm going to do is add a read more link. So we haven't yet actually used RapidWeaver's link sheet. So what this does is allow us to select some text and link it off to any other page on our website. So let me show you how you do that. Let's go to the text stack, double click to edit, and what I'm going to say is read more. Then we can highlight that text and select the link option here. That will bring up RapidWeaver's link sheet. Now by default you can just type in a URL, so if you want to send them off to any other website or any other page on the internet, you can simply paste in or type in the URL here. Or, where the power of RapidWeaver comes in, you can select one of the other pages on your site. So for example, we could just link this text to the home page for now, because we don't have a dedicated page for each individual project. We'll just link it to the home as an example. So you just select home, you set the link, and you're done. This text is now linked to the home page. So no matter if you change the URL for the home page or you move the home page around in the menu, RapidWeaver will keep track of that, and this text will always link off to that home page. So that's a key point. If you're linking to any other page inside of RapidWeaver, don't manually type the URL. Use RapidWeaver's built-in link sheet and select the page that you want to link to, because as I say, RapidWeaver will keep track of that URL for you. Okay, finally what I'm going to do is just reduce this text down a little bit so that we've got a bit more space to work with. Okay, so I think that project is looking good. What I'm going to do is copy that into the other two columns. And then finally, before we preview, I'm going to update the images for each one of these columns. So we're going to go open up the assets again, go to the projects folder, and I'm going to drag in the two different images into here, like so. So let's go back to Safari and preview that. And there you'll see we now have a 3-column layout with 3 different projects. Finally, what I'm going to do before I do a second row is update these headers. So we'll go back to we'll go back to RapidWeaver, and we'll say project 1, project 2, and finally project 3. Okay, then what I'm going to do is duplicate this 3-column stack and do a second row. So, as with any other stack, what we can do is hold down the Alt key and drag that, and you'll see that we can just duplicate that 3-column layout. So now we have 2 rows. What we can do is just update these images to the other 3 that I've got in the assets folder here. So I've got 4, 5, and 6. Like so. And I'll just quickly update these headers as well. Okay, now we'll go back to Safari and preview that. And there we see we have our 2 rows of columns. What we want to do is add a bit of spacing on the first row. So we'll select this 3-column stack. We'll go to the layout. We'll add some detailed margin, and we'll say 40 pixels on the bottom. Preview that and you'll see it spaced nicely. Okay, so let's continue and add some content below these columns. And to do that, what I'm going to do, just to give us a little bit more space, is actually use the hide feature in stacks. So I'm going to select the 3-column stack here and then select hide. And what that essentially does is just collapse that parent stack up, so we get a little bit more space to work with. And I'm going to do the same for the second row. And then what we're going to do is add some content below here, like I said. So let's close out the page inspector, open up the stacks library, and I'm going to add a 1-column stack below there. Then inside of there I'm going to add a text stack. And then I'm going to modify this text, and I'm going to say like what you see. I'm going to make this text bold and increase the size a little bit. Then I'm going to select all of the text and center align it. Finally, what I'm going to do is select the 1-column stack, and I'm going to close out the library, open up the page inspector, and I'm going to add 20 pixels of padding all the way around on this stack. Then I'm going to set a background color. So to do that, select the color option in the background settings, and then we can select a blue color perhaps, and change the opacity down to maybe 10%, like so. Then I'm going to set the rounded corners to also be 3 pixels. And then we'll go back to Safari and have a preview of that. And there you can see we've added this nice like what you see or call to action box where we could perhaps link off to the contact page. So to do that, let's go to RapidWeaver again and edit this text. So we'll double click and we'll say contact me. I'm going to highlight that text, select the link button, and again go to the page and then select contact. Set the link, go back to Safari, and when we click on the contact me link we get taken to the contact page. Okay, so let's go back to our stacks page. I think what we need to do before we finish up this video is just add a little bit of margin here. So we'll go back to RapidWeaver, open up the left hand sidebar, go to the work page again, and then on the 3-column stack here I'm going to add a margin on the bottom of 40 pixels, and we'll just preview that, and there we can see it's working nicely. Okay, so hopefully you're starting to see how you can use stacks to build up a custom designed page inside of RapidWeaver. On the home page, for example, if we have a look, we're a little bit stuck to having just one content area, or perhaps two if we were using the sidebar as well. But there's not as much flexibility to add multiple columns inside of here. There's not as much flexibility to add different types of headers and images and mix and match those inside of the columns and different layout types that we want on our page. So even though, again, for example, on the contact page, we have some flexibility to add things like a header and different form field types, and we also have a sidebar, we can't actually split the main content area into 2 columns, for example, very easily. However, with stacks, we can have any type of layout that we want on the page. So I've demonstrated here how we can have 3 columns, and we can have 2 rows of 3 columns, and then perhaps another row below that. You can mix and match these as you wish. And that is essentially where the power of stacks comes in. It frees you from having just 1 or 2 content areas to play with, and gives you the freedom to add as many columns or layouts as you like by dragging in the different layout stacks into a stacks page. So before we move on to having a look at some of the more advanced stacks and some freeform frameworks that we can use to build up a completely custom designed website in RapidWeaver, I want to mention the responsive design features that are built into stacks. So I touched on it earlier. If we go to RapidWeaver, you'll notice that there is a responsive settings area here where we can either hide this stack on mobile, tablet or desktop, and for columns we can have stacked columns on mobile, tablet or desktop, or any combination of those. So to demonstrate this, let's go back to Safari and go to the Develop menu and enter Responsive Design Mode. This will bring up Safari's responsive design mode where you can preview your site across different devices. Okay, so by default, stacks will stack those column layouts on a mobile device. So you can see here, even on an iPad, we still have the 3-column layout, and if we go to a desktop, you'll see again it's still 3 columns. But as we get down to a phone size, so perhaps an iPhone 6s, you'll see that those columns are now stacked on top of each other. And you'll likely have seen this on any modern website. You will have, when the viewport is wide enough, those columns will be aligned next to each other, and then when the viewport becomes small enough, for example on a phone, they will get stacked on top of each other. Now you can customize this, as I say, by using the stacked column setting here. So if we wanted the columns to be stacked on a tablet device, we can just check the option here. Now the first row of 3 columns will be stacked on tablet, but the second row of 3 columns won't. So let's go and preview how that works. So if we go to an iPad Pro, for example, the viewport is wide enough to have 3 columns. However, if we go to an iPad Air, you'll see the first columns are stacked. However, the second set of 3 columns are still aligned next to each other. So we can change that again. If we select the second set of 3 columns, we can check the tablet option. We'll go back and preview that. And you'll now see that all of the columns are stacked on top of each other. Okay, the final thing I want to mention is hiding the stack on different devices. So if for some reason you wanted to hide this header on a mobile, you can do that. I'm not sure why you want to, but you can. You can hide just this stack on a mobile by selecting this option here. Now when we go back to Safari and we go down, let's say an iPhone SE, you'll see that the header is hidden on an iPhone SE. If we go and uncheck that option, you'll see that it reappears on the iPhone SE there. So this might be handy if you have a complex layout on your page, or if you have a large image that you don't want to be displayed on a mobile device. You can use these options here to hide and show content on different devices. Okay, that'll do it for this video. You've learnt the basics of stacks and how you can use it to create a freeform layout inside of your RapidWeaver site. In the next video, we're going to take this a step further and start using the Foundry framework for RapidWeaver, which will allow us to build a completely custom and unique website inside of RapidWeaver. So once you're ready, I'll see you there.